She seemed better that day. That's the worst part of everything, right? Is that she seemed better, and by like 3 or 4 p.m. I was just exhausted, just exhausted. So I said, look, honey, I'm gonna lay down and have a little nap, and I'll see you when I get up. She said, okay. Well, she had some things to run out and grab, some things to do, and I went to sleep. At that point in time, I'd been up for probably 30 some odd hours. So when I woke up, it was still early enough that she could have, I thought, oh, she's still out doing stuff. So my biggest regret is I went back to sleep. The biggest regret is that I just thought, oh, she'll be home soon, and she'll wake me up when she gets here. So I went back to sleep. And then the next time I woke up, it was 5 or 6 in the morning. And at that point in time, I knew there's no way, she should be here. There's something happened. So I started panicking. So the police came, and at that point in time, I felt sick to my stomach. So I thought, I don't know. I just didn't know what was happening. And I let them in, they looked around, they couldn't find her either. They asked if she had a vehicle, and I said, yes, I believe it's downstairs. So we went to look downstairs. She was in the back of the vehicle. I thought that she would be okay. I thought so. I told them to smash the windows, the side windows on the vehicle. I told them to smash the back window. They smashed it. They couldn't get the door open. First they told me to run up and get the keys. I said, just smash the windows. I thought, whatever's going on, if she needs help, if she needs life support, she needs mouth-to-mouth, she needs it now. And they couldn't get the back door open, so I said, smash the front window. And they did. And they opened the door. I stepped forward because I wanted to be right there to help her. I guess they reached in and grabbed her or whatever, and I don't know, but she must have been stiff or cold or something, because they told me right away she's gone, and they pushed me back, let me back. But I saw her laying there dead. I'll never get that image out of my mind as long as I live. I feel like I lost my mind in that moment. And to tell you the truth, I don't even know if I've regained it. I've had 1,000 different emotions since all this happened. And it's like, grief's like a wheel, or it's like a figure 8 or something, because you just keep going through the cycle of it. You just keep going through it. It doesn't end. I don't know if it ever ends. And there's stages to it. There's regret. I regret going back to sleep. I regret not knowing. I don't know if I could have changed anything. I don't know if she was already passed away or if I would have found her. And that's why I think I have those dreams where I'm searching for her. I regret that her work didn't take her seriously and they didn't respect her position. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I'm lost.
This is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
We are seeing an outbreak of the unvaccinated.
I want to be crystal clear about what's happening in the country today. We have a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
141 people are in hospital with COVID at present, and 43 are in intensive care, 18 of whom require ventilation. All but one are vaccinated. All but one are vaccinated.
Vaccination against COVID-19 can help kids get back to being kids. Book vaccination appointments for eligible children in your family.
I don't want one single ever telling me I need to get the vaccine. My little sister just died. Her first dose. You want to sit here and tell me that vaccine works? That vaccine, the government, Joe Biden, anybody who forces anybody to get a vaccine.
If you don't want to get vaccinated, that's your choice. But don't think you can get on a plane or a train besides vaccinated people and put them at risk.
fucking piece of goddamn shit! You!
The FDA has given full approval to the Pfizer COVID vaccine in record time, actually just 8 months after it received emergency authorization. And it has already led numerous employers, universities, and the military to impose vaccine mandates.
If you work in hospitality, you need to get the jab. If you work in retail or in a supermarket, you need to get the jab. If you are behind the counter at the bank, if you're a receptionist or positions like that, you need to get the jab. If you are a barber, a hairdresser, a beauty therapist, you need to get the jab.
All Canadians, including me, are frustrated to see vaccines in freezers and not in people's arms.
For the vast majority of you who've gotten vaccinated, I understand your anger at those who haven't gotten vaccinated.
Some of the anger playing out on Melbourne streets are the direct result of mandatory vaccination.
Justin, how do you like your fan club now, you fucking goof?
Against all odds, protesters have managed to breach police lines and swarm the streets of Richmond.
The Biden administration has been citing data that 99% of COVID deaths and 95% of hospitalizations are among the unvaccinated. Well, it turns out that statistic is grossly misleading, something the CDC director inadvertently admitted today.
Those data were data that were from analyses in several states from January through June and didn't reflect the data that we have now from the Delta variant.
Divide and conquer has been in the playbook for such a long time, and we're seeing that now. So what they did, the Nazis, is they picked out the Jews, and then they created a health issue so people would have an excuse and something to direct their anger at. The Jews as being unclean and infectious. So that helped people justify their actions. We're doing the same thing now. They're creating the dangerous, infectious people who have not had the COVID-19 vaccine, that those people are a danger to the other. And that's how it's created this division of the vaxxed versus the unvaxxed.
As we talk about vaccine mandates, I get calls all the time. People say, I've already had COVID, I'm protected, and now the study says maybe even more protected than the vaccine alone. Should they also get the vaccine? How do you make the case to them?
You know, that's a really good point, Sanjay. I don't have a really firm answer for you on that.
Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
Well, first of all, we know that it's not a vaccine, because a vaccine, at least in the original description of it, was something which would prevent catching or giving a disease.
When you use a term like vaccination, the public thinks that means I'm getting something that is going to stop me from getting sick or keep me from transmitting that sickness. That's cunningly what vaccination means. And it's actually defined in the statute as exactly that. It's actually the ability to put something into the body that stimulates the immune system. It turns out that the mRNA that's being injected into people is not that. In fact, specifically what it does is it takes a little computer-simulated strand of mRNA, it sends it into the body, and the body becomes a biological weapons factory. It manufactures spike protein. The injection does not stimulate any immunity. It actually is the instructions to make a scheduled pathogen. We have a decade of data that shows us that mRNA actually can transcribe into DNA. Using the term vaccination was intended to essentially mislead the public.
Here's one of the problems that I had right from the very beginning. I won't use the name of the public health official, but she said, basically at the start of the pandemic, We are not going to get out of this until we have an effective and safe vaccine, which was basically repeated by probably every public health person in the world.
This is what is going to get us out of the pandemic that we are in right now.
So what that did is it took all of the options of dealing with the pandemic, and there's many of them. There's perhaps drugs, there's preventive treatments, there might even be vitamins that help, right? But it was putting all of this emphasis into a vaccine. When I heard that, my heart dropped. That has become the focus of the way out of the pandemic. And it's unfortunate because there are probably many ways out of the pandemic.
So many of the doctors have believed this narrative of fear about this terrible virus. People desperately don't want to believe that the shots could be failing us because this is our way out. If the way out isn't the way out because these are going to do more harm than good, that's a devastating thought. And so people are so reluctant to accept that.
We push the vaccines because that's where the money is. There's no money in ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine.
You're putting all your eggs in one basket. Well, what if the basket is faulty? What if they rushed something into production because they felt like that was the only option and spent billions of dollars to develop a treatment that may or may not be effective and didn't work?
There's a lot of fun with numbers going on here. Basically, most of the people in the hospital now with COVID are people who are vaccinated.
You know, here in BC, we've got more than 90% of the population vaccinated. And yet the COVID numbers haven't changed. They're still having COVID outbreaks where they have fired all the unvaccinated people. So they've got all of these COVID outbreaks occurring in places where there's no unvaccinated people. You would think that anyone with half a brain would realize this is not working.
What if it made things worse?
The thing that makes this whole thing work is this synthetic chemical that accumulates in the ovaries. What is the potential risk associated with this novel chemical accumulating in the ovaries?
There is that hubris thing that we think we know so much more. We can just play God with everybody. And the fact was we don't know how it turns out at all. And that makes it an experiment. You can do an experiment just because you don't know something.
What if all the money, all of the energy, all of the sheer hope and expectation that the public has put into this one basket proves to be a mirage or something that is actually worse than being just ineffective?
The number of deaths we're seeing with these shots, the COVID-19 injections, is just astronomical. And it's just climbing all the time. And we're going to see a lot more injuries.
My wife started to try to work towards an exemption, right? She worked towards a medical exemption. She worked towards religious exemption. And the workplace stonewalled her on all accounts. Like she was denied her religious exemption twice. She was denied her medical exemption as well. She tried every day. I was doing research, I was listening to stuff from different scientists, different doctors, people who were talking about this, sort of experts in their fields, and trying to find a way for my wife to sort of navigate this and to get the exemption that she so desperately desired. She was willing to undergo testing. She was willing to do, jump through whatever hoops were necessary to keep other people safe. She was entirely fine with that. But the workplace nor her union were willing to accommodate her. And it turned out that her having a union actually worked against her. Because she wasn't able to sue or legally dispute this issue, she was forced to go through her union that was not backing her up, right? If anything, they were part of the bullying she experienced. The lady who is in charge of the union's name is Jean. She wouldn't talk to her, and she basically scolded my wife and kicked my wife out of the office. So she was treated like garbage by these people who she'd spent over a decade serving and working with and backing. If there was strike or something like that, my wife was right there with them, trying to back them up. My wife taught the anti-harassment class at BC Transit, and it was the most darkly ironic thing because she was suffering harassment. She was suffering bullying because of her medical decisions.
The safest thing for your child, 12 and older, is to get them vaccinated. They get vaccinated for a lot of things. That's it, get them vaccinated.
The CDC is investigating rare cases of heart inflammation among vaccinated teens and young adults.
16 to 24-year-olds who received the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine have experienced higher than normal cases of myocarditis and inflammation of the heart muscle.
The one truth you won't be told is an 85-year-old has a 10,000 times greater chance of dying than the 10-year-old.
Now, you think we should treat them the same? If you were their doctor, do you think a 10-year-old should get the same health care and the same prescriptions for what they need to do as an 85-year-old?
You're going to be able to get your vaccine as soon as you turn 5. And I know you're excited and I know you're eager. In some places across the country, you can even start making your appointment now for shortly after your birthday.
I am in the hospital right now with heart complications from the COVID-19 vaccine. And I want to inform as many people as I can about the risks from taking the vaccine that I wish someone would have told me. So I am a Division I student athlete with no prior health issues. And I got the second COVID shot Tuesday, and within 4 days, I have been diagnosed with myocarditis.
Every single vaccine available in Canada has been approved by Health Canada as being both safe and effective. We all want to get through this pandemic as quickly as possible, and that means all of us getting vaccinated.
They carry on forcing people to have this shot that has now broken all records for vaccine injury and death and is clearly not working. None of this makes sense.
Many, many people that you know, that I love, could be harmed. But people would say, but we had this virus, we had this pandemic, we had to do this. One thing that 27 years of studying the drug industry has taught me is that caution and careful science is slow. It takes a while.
When you get dug into these positions and you can't come out of those foxholes, you can't be flexible, you can't adapt dynamically, then we're stuck with bad policy.
If you're going to do something overnight and then give it to almost the entire adult population and possibly the child population as well, you better make sure that the longer term benefits outweigh the harms.
We are in the middle of the largest experiment in human beings that has ever been performed, full stop. And we have rushed the safety evaluation and we have minimized the risks.
By March of 2021, 12 countries in Europe had shut down the AstraZeneca shot, and there was great concern about the Johnson & Johnson one as well because of blood clots.
We break our evening of college hoops coverage to pass along some sad news in the world of boxing. Former middleweight champion Marvin Hagler has died. Hagler is considered to be one of the greatest middleweight fighters to ever enter the ring, holding the undisputed middleweight title from 1980 through 1987.
Unexpectedly, Lisa Jones lost her mother on Saturday within a couple of hours after she received the Pfizer vaccine.
Legendary outfielder Hank Aaron has died.
The 86-year-old Hall of Famer was vaccinated on January 5th. He died in his sleep 18 days later.
On November 7th, I was mandated to receive a vaccine. Quite literally, I was told if I did not receive the vaccination, I would be fired. Just a few days ago, after landing in Dallas, 6 minutes after we landed, I passed out. I coded. I required 3 shocks. I need to be intubated. I'm now in the ICU in Dallas. This is what the vaccine has done for me. I will probably never fly again.
54-year-old Francine Boyer died after receiving the AstraZeneca vaccine.
I think that's the price to pay to be vaccinated and to be going back to a normal life at one point in time.
Normally, there's a foundational principle of medical ethics that if some experimental treatment is being tested and there's evidence of harm, you're supposed to stop the experiment.
Yeah, we've never used mRNA technology before in humans, skipping all the animal trials and ignoring a lot of the adverse events that are occurring.
All previous attempts to make coronavirus vaccines and gene-based vaccines had not gone well. There was no evidence for their safety, just none.
Doctors are afraid, step out of the lines from the fact that the college will come after them for not practicing medicine properly, but because of the condemnation they'll get from their colleagues.
Dr. Alistair McAlpine is one of 13 doctors who complained to the College of Physicians and Surgeons about Dr. Hoff spreading misinformation last December.
I sent an email to 18 medical colleagues who were doctors, nurses, and pharmacists who were actually involved in giving these shots. And I just expressed to them my concerns about the evidence of harm, and in view of that, the personal liability involved in giving a harmful product to people, and just question the ethics. None of them responded at all, but one of them sent my email to my superiors at the Interior Health Authority. So within 3 days, I had a meeting with them where I was reprimanded, and they also told me that I was going to be reported to the College of Physicians and Surgeons for causing vaccine hesitancy, which seemed to be a new crime.
It's really hard to step outside the box. You're probably going to be stepping out by yourself pretty much. And that's a really, really strong force, probably in every profession, but certainly in medicine. I've noticed it there since day one.
I mean, psychologically, I think politicians are also susceptible to the same kind of fear that they manage to create in the population. So they're terrified. They're terrified people.
If you say pro-persuasion, stuff it, shove it. We are absolutely going to make sure as many Territorians as possible are vaccinated. Your personal vaccination status is utterly irrelevant. And if you are out there in any way, shape or form campaigning against this mandate, you are absolutely anti-vax.
We'll just do this thing because everyone knows that all vaccines are safe and effective except those anti-vaxxers who cares about them. And therefore, we can just ignore all the safety signals and ignore all the unknowns, which are vast. And without further ado, we'll just push it down to pregnant women and 5-year-olds, because what could go wrong?
Pregnant women who were known to be pregnant were excluded from the clinical trials, but we now know they've been used in pregnant women, and we know that pregnant women are more likely to have more severe illness with COVID. The answer is yes, they're safe and they're effective, and it's best to be protected.
There is a lot of confusion after the World Health Organization recommended pregnant women hold off on getting vaccinated.
Kind of astonishing, actually. Many PhD theses in psychology will be written about this in the coming years, I'm sure.
Syncytin-1, which is a protein which is present in the placenta, is also potentially attacked by your own immune system if you create these spike proteins. All these spontaneous abortions or miscarriages are coming from that.
In the Waterloo area, 86 stillbirths have occurred from January to July, and normally it's roughly one stillbirth every 2 months. But here's the kicker. Mothers of stillbirth babies were fully vaccinated, and you have clearly said on numerous occasions that the vaccines are safe. So, Minister, what do you say to the doctors who told expecting women it was okay to get fully vaccinated, and what should they tell the mothers who deliver a stillborn baby?
We are recommending that women who are pregnant do receive the vaccine for the protection of themselves, protection of their baby as well.
How can the university of any state name you want to put in there condone vaccinating children with these experimental agents, these experimental genetic agents that have never been tried on children before? I'd like to see somebody look me in the eye and tell me how they justify that.
Based on the safety data now, I can no longer recommend it. I can't recommend it. It's past all the thresholds to being a safe product. It's not a safe product. None of them are.
So a 1-month-old baby is breastfeeding. Mother takes the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. The baby dies at 1 month of thrombocytopenia. That alone should have caused a stoppage of this, in my opinion, because you can't just talk that one away. What happened there? I hope they're very seriously looking at that.
Are these public health officers that stupid that they could actually think this way? I don't think so. I think these are criminals, and I think they're killing people, and they know they're killing people. When they know they're killing people, that's murder. I think sociopath describes it very well. They're the people that are killing our children.
We have what's called mature minor consent here in British Columbia, and there's no limit to the age that somebody can consent for medical treatment, including immunization. So you don't need to have a parent's consent. You don't need to have a signed consent form.
Kids told they can make their own decision on this, and it could be their fatal decision. Think about that. There are now papers written by prominent scientists calling for a worldwide halt in the program.
Doctors, for the most part, are highly vaccinated. Probably in this province, 96%. Nurses also highly vaccinated, maybe 85, 90%. So there's a high level of belief, whether they really believe in it or they're just doing it to keep their jobs. Okay?
There are prominent virologists, many of them, including Nobel Prize winners, who have said, listen, if we vaccinate people and we create a very narrow, incomplete library of immunity, which is what the vaccine is, the vaccines are all targeted to the original Wuhan spike protein, which is long gone. That's extinct. Patients are getting vaccinated to something that doesn't even exist anymore.
What about the 10% of nurses or the 5% of doctors that would refuse to get vaccinated? Are they stupid, conspiracy theorists, anti-vax types?
There are warnings out there saying, don't do this. Don't vaccinate the entire world.
Some healthcare professionals have had to treat people that have been vaccine injured, right? So they have seen people who've developed autoimmune conditions or heart conditions or Guillain-Barré syndrome.
I mean, this is an experiment. Doctors are completely uninformed about it. There is all they've been told is that it's safe and effective.
We assume because they're not going along with the crowd, they must be irrational or they must be... If you've been in a job where you've seen people injured by a certain technology, you're going to be pretty wary of that technology.
In our limited experience in Lytton, these shots seem to be more dangerous than COVID.
And I've seen this in the drug world as well. Some doctors who would never prescribe certain drugs. Why? Because they've seen patients injured and hospitalized because of those drugs. And I can tell you, I know dozens of examples of people who have died from taking, approved prescribed drugs.
Vioxx is here, a prescription medicine for osteoarthritis pain.
Recent publications have revealed safety problems with the drug Vioxx. And according to your testimony, the manufacturer delayed communications of known risk and minimized those risks in its communication.
That drug killed as many Americans as the Viet Cong. They paid significant fines. You might say, well, did it ever stop them from doing it again? No, because the fines that they give to big drug companies are almost like you getting a parking fine.
In a combination civil and criminal settlement, Pfizer has agreed to pay $2.3 billion, the largest healthcare fraud settlement in the history of the Department of Justice, which makes it the largest criminal fine in history.
As parents, we are being asked to trust known criminals to provide vaccines for our children. Vaccines that will be mainlined into their brain and organs. And for a virus that rarely affects children, it seems like a lot to ask.
Normally, vaccines just stay in your arm, but there had been a study done in mice in Japan that showed that these shots went intravenous. Pfizer had kept it in Japanese, and until Dr. Byram Bridle had it translated into English, nobody knew about this.
What we do know for sure, what is not speculation, is this vaccine spreads throughout the body. What we also know is that proper studies have not been conducted. Remarkably, it hasn't been done in people. And it has not been done at all with the actual vaccine formulation that we are administering to our children.
These little lipid nanocapsules that the Pfizer and Moderna shots are in were designed to be able to go to every part of your body. You're mainlining this vaccine, and 75% of it goes intravenous.
Pfizer has a long track record, as you probably know, for corrupt practices. This is not their first rodeo in this regard.
I mean, are we going to trust Pfizer and Moderna and those guys? They don't have the history of being honest.
We don't know anything at all about the potential for long-term side effects. Most of you would be well advised to stay away from experimental vaccines. Why would you take a risk with your health for something that's not a threat to you?
When the people who are inside the research apparatus are starting to blow the whistle, I believe you have to sit up and pay attention to that. Quite frankly, there is an astonishing level of censorship. Friends I know, colleagues I've done research with over the years, kicked off Twitter, erased.
So remember, we're subject to censorship, so of course I'd been busy as hell, and of course you'd never have heard of me. This is the problem now.
Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
People labeled me as a vaccine skeptic. No, I'm sorry. This technology originally came from my bench. I've spent 30 years advancing vaccines. I'm a person who believes passionately that things need to be done in a right, proper, and ethical fashion. And when I see the norms of vaccine development and bioethics being discarded willy-nilly for no particular reason and putting people at risk, I feel ethically bound to say, no, this isn't right.
I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I'm not a person to take chances. I want to see the evidence. I want to make sure that I will be true to my oath as a doctor and do no harm.
So my name is Byram, and I am an associate professor of viral immunology at the University of Guelph. I have been trying to serve as a voice of objective scientific opinion so that the public can make the most informed decisions for themselves possible when it comes to issues related to COVID-19. I am a publicly funded servant, and therefore I see it as my responsibility to Canadians that when they have questions, that they can come to me and ask the questions, and if they are pertinent to my areas of expertise, then I feel it's my responsibility to give the most informed answer that I can, so that they can help make informed decisions.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough, and I'm an internist and cardiologist and academic physician, professor of medicine. I'm the president of the Cardiorenal Society of America. I'm considered the most published person on this topic in the world in history. I chair many FDA-approved clinical trial data safety monitoring board. In fact, I've probably seen and examined more drug safety trial data than any doctor in current American medicine. So I'm well grounded in chronic disease epidemiology and randomized trials.
This year marks the 40th year I've been studying pharmacology, biochemistry, molecular biology, toxicology. And so I've got a very broad grounding in all things to do with life science in terms of health and disease. But one of my former supervisors said that I was able to spot patterns in sparse data earlier than my peers did. Really, I guess I was running a lot of simulations in my head and trying to work out what could these small bits of information mean. But on this occasion, it allowed me quite quickly to work out that what we were being told about this virus and what we needed to do in order to stay safe was simply not true.
Well, I've always been a little bit outside the box. Because I do integrative medicine, I've always been willing to look at other ideas, homeopathy, Chinese medicine, orthomolecular medicine, acupuncture, nutrition. It didn't take long before we had scientists speaking out, saying that, hey, all these mathematical modeling projections that came out of Imperial College were completely false. And then you find out that the person's being sponsored by Bill Gates, and then you start to follow that back down to the WHO. Let's say, call this the medical cabal, who are trying to control the way this is going and control the narrative.
I would have had a lot more respect for our medical establishment if they would have put the vaccines out, said, look, these are not tested to the same level that we typically are able to test vaccines. But because this is an emergency, we want to offer people the opportunity to take these vaccines that may, according to certain studies, prevent worst case outcomes. If they hadn't lied and said, oh, it'll stop transmission, or they tried to convince people they were taking it for their neighbor, that you were taking it to protect other people. It doesn't protect anyone else. That's patently absurd. By not reporting on this and by not discussing these things, the media has lost credibility. The medical establishment has lost credibility, and the government themselves have lost credibility. Who knows what the future outcomes of this will be or how that will affect the future of our country or whatever, right? These are institutions that we all rely on to function with some sort of empirical oversight and not based on what's best for Pfizer as a corporation. It should be what's best for the Canadian people. And that's what seems to be so shocking to me, is that people are so willing to accept the corruption of these institutions and allow this to happen without ever thinking of how that'll affect their children or their children's children. There's a huge cross-section of the population in this country, millions of people, who have had their trust in these institutions completely destroyed. I can tell you that my wife isn't the only person who's been lost over this. Children committing suicide because of the isolation, because of being locked down. It's all these things where they can just sort of sweep it under the rug or they can ignore it. If it's individual cases, the media is not going to report on it. They didn't report on my wife and they never will. They won't discuss the situation. They won't discuss the children who've committed suicide. They won't question the lockdowns. It's absolutely shocking. It's a disgusting trampling of the rights that all of our forefathers and our grandmothers, our foremothers, that these people would have fought for, that these people would have died for.
If you step out about vaccines or about this sort of stuff, you are considered to be an apostate. And you see it with physicians all the time about vaccines. And look what happened to Paul Thomas in Oregon. Lost his license.
2016, I wrote the vaccine-friendly plan that sort of put the attention on my practice and the fact that, hey, there's this guy out in Oregon who's taking a shot at the CDC schedule. And that was just a science-based book to say, folks, it does not have to be one size fits all. They actually challenged me. They said, prove that the vaccine-friendly plan is as safe as the CDC schedule. That's when I created the data set that became the publication published in a peer-reviewed journal, this Vaxxed-Unvaxxed study that's based on real-world data of over 3,000 patients. On November 23rd, 2020, we published this study in a peer-reviewed journal, and 5 days after it was available online on December 3rd, I got a call from my attorney. The Oregon Medical Board had an emergency meeting and suspended your license. You are a threat to public health. You give them what they asked for, and they apparently weren't happy with what they got.
You've gone against the true faith. And this is what vaccinology and this branch of science have become. They become cults, cult religions. And if you deviate, you get punished. You get kicked out. You get shunned.
This has achieved the level of a religion. If you believe that the measures that you're doing right now, vaccines, if you believe that those are the things that you need to defeat the pandemic and get back to normal, then you're just going to do more of them.
It's the sacred cow of modern medicine. And doctors have had that drilled into them since day one. So if that's the case, you can't expect them suddenly to twig to the fact that these vaccines are neither effective nor safe.
The first way of dealing with people who dissent from things like safety of drugs or vaccines is to isolate them and to discredit them and to make them an example to other doctors, not even to get involved in this in the first place. Let me quote you from the Vioxx trial in Australia that has just come out. It was fascinating. There was an exchange of internal emails at Merck about how they dealt with doctors who dissented from the use of Vioxx, said it wasn't safe. It talked about how they would isolate them and discredit them. And the final one was the most telling of all. It said, we may have to seek them out and destroy them where they live.
Andrew Wakefield and his senior co-author, John Walker Smith, were accused of essentially research fraud. And that came out of the work of a journalist named Brian Deere.
Andrew Wakefield is a fraudster. Parents have been grievously misled.
Somehow this plucky journalist managed to find stuff that the scientific community had missed. The fact that the scientific community didn't get it was probably telling. Brian Deere made a series of statements about how the work was done that were simply incorrect. And it led in turn to Andrew Wakefield being delisted as a medical doctor in the UK. He and his senior co-author, John Walker Smith, were both delisted at the same time. Walker Smith had money. He took it to the High Court in Britain and clobbered the GMC, and he got relisted. So Wakefield could be wrong, but that doesn't mean it was fraud. The amount of crap he had to deal with, and including being delisted and being hounded and made to be a pariah, was to send a message to other scientists.
What actually happened is that I recommended, based upon not just upon that study, but upon a review of all of the literature of vaccine safety studies looking at measles virus, going to a report of 250 pages, which I wrote, that I could no longer support the MMR vaccine. I would continue to vigorously support the use of single vaccines, spaced out, but the safety studies of MMR vaccine were not there. They were not adequate.
You know, if you're a doctor and you're making a couple $100,000 a year or more, do you want that to stop? I don't think so.
This was a Saturday evening. I was at home having dinner with some friends, and I got this phone call from the nurse in the emergency room because I was the doctor on call. And the nurse explained who it was and the condition, and I said, that patient had COVID 5 weeks ago. She should never have had a shot for it. We know that if you've already had COVID, the risk of serious adverse effects is way higher if you get vaccinated. So I explained to this nurse the medical research that had been done in Singapore at Duke University, which showed that people who have had a SARS virus infection have a long-lasting immunity that is broad enough to cover every variant. And I said, based on this research, please will you tell this patient that she doesn't need her second shot. She is already immune to COVID. And so this got back to the medical authorities who had given me the gag order, who then told me that I was encouraging nurses to tell people not to be vaccinated. And on the basis of that, they revoked my admitting and emergency room privileges, which means that I was effectively fired as an emergency room physician, which also meant that I cannot work as an emergency physician anywhere. The only sense that it made is that they were clearly looking for something to nail me on.
It was like a nuclear bomb went off in my world, and my life was thrown upside down. There was a libelous website that was put up using my domain name. A fake Twitter account was developed to slander me, and I've been undergoing daily attacks, both in the social media and in the workplace. It's even gone so far as to have one of the members of the Ontario COVID-19 Science Advisory Committee post the link to this slanderous website. And they have fanned the flames of this smear campaign. They even went so far as to release confidential medical information about my parents. This is an egregious act.
Why are the experts being silenced? Aren't these the people we should have turned to when this whole thing began? Meanwhile, every corporate news channel in the nation is giving a voice to Bill Gates, a man who has had no medical training and whom admittedly has made a personal fortune off of vaccines.
The government will allow no information to get out, whether true or false, that would lead to vaccine hesitancy and reduced vaccine uptake. There must be full and complete disclosure of risk, as opposed to editing of data about risk. I kind of fall into the camp that people are grown-ups, and they ought to be allowed to make their own decisions. And this kind of paternalistic mother-henning by the World Health Organization and the CDC and the communication channels in the federal government is grossly outdated and, by the way, rather demeaning. We're kind of gaslighting the whole population.
I do think, unfortunately, what you're seeing is sort of a politicalization of how the data is presented. They've made a decision that vaccines are important. Vaccines are the key to this pandemic. They're not the key. So I think it's really misguided when selective data is presented in order to advance a point of view. We should have much more rigorous debate, put all the data out there, have enough respect for the American people that if you share the data, you share the truth.
Over the last 3 months, I've spoken to 8 professors at UK universities whose discipline includes immunology. They won't contest the COVID narrative, and they've all agreed with my interpretation. None of them will say anything.
A lot of what you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. So if you are trying to, get at me as a public health official and a scientist, you're really attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you're attacking science.
This is a very, very dangerous sort of idea. The idea that a government bureaucrat represents science and that he is now untouchable, that it is sort of like you are now contradicting the all-high priest of science. If you say anything, you're not to question him, just do as you're told.
Science and the truth are being attacked.
When Anthony Fauci arrogantly refers to himself as the science, he's not wrong. And this is a major problem with so-called science around the globe today. Between Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates, they control billions upon billions of dollars in grant money, and they strategically spend it to influence colleges, universities, governments, and public health globally.
Who has the ability to give billions of dollars? Who personally allocates, without congressional oversight or any kind of oversight, billions of dollars in funding to people? Anthony Fauci through the NDAID at NIH. So he's been able to set himself up as this, the kind of the spider in the web of all these different organizations. I'm sure if he tells them you have to use remdesivir and you can't talk about hydroxychloroquine, the guy that's getting 88% of his hospital funding from him says, okay, yes, sir.
It's hard to find a scientist that hasn't been influenced by their funding. And in the case of the WHO, Gates, as one of their biggest donors, has swayed their focus away from poverty alleviation, nutrition, and clean water in places like Africa towards vaccine development. Africa and India being the perfect places to test your vaccines on human guinea pigs out of the watchful eye of the EU and North America.
We're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms, and we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein.
When you take these vaccines, get them to be very inexpensive by making big volume commitments, have that right relationship with the private sector. Our foundation is a bit more than 10 billion, but we feel there's been over a 20-to-1 return. So if you just look at the economic benefits, that's a pretty strong number compared to anything else.
Many people don't know that Gates and Fauci have been partners for decades, and together they have built a powerful global network including heads of state, health ministers, international health regulators, the World Health Organization, World Bank, World Economic Forum, and key leaders from the financial industry and even military officials. All in all, they fund 300,000 positions, and these doctors, hospital administrators, health officials, and research virologists are the foot soldiers in their war to support lucrative vaccines.
It's great the U.S. government has been willing to fund vaccine manufacturers. Our foundation is partnered with them on that. That's something in my regular phone calls with Dr. Fauci we update each other on. Okay, how are we working with various companies? Which ones do we think we need to add to the mix there?
At the end of the day, these two men, through their financial stranglehold on the world, controlled the narrative around COVID-19 that led to mass vaccination and a giant payoff for all their partners such as Pfizer and Moderna. And now the World Health Organization is trying to take total, unelected control of how countries respond to pandemics. Essentially, this means that Bill Gates will decide which measures he wants to inflict upon us in his next pandemic. Our governments and we the people will have no say.
2010 to 2020 was called the decade of the vaccine, right? And up to 2030, they have something called Immunization Agenda 2030, which is basically designed to put every vaccine conceivable into every human being on the planet. And this is largely with Gates money, by the way. So WHO is not a independent player here. And of course, they take a lot of money from the pharmaceutical industry. And they have been doing that for a good 20, 25 years. And so we've seen with them before their attempts at creating pandemics, whether it was bird flu or whether it was swine flu or any of the others, this is what they do. They run around screaming that, we're all going to die, and then stampede governments into buying these large stocks of pharmaceutical products, which of course they're getting kickbacks on. And then when the pandemic fails, governments are left holding a lot of stock that they can't get rid of. This time they got away with it. So this was a great success from their perspective.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
So this is the way it works with vaccines. You're not sick, but you may be sick. It's a completely different calculus. if you may be sick, whatever you give someone, you can't go ahead and make them sick from that thing. You have to be able to prove that anything that they would have gotten has been prevented by what you gave them. And that's really hard to do.
The argument that we've heard is, well, COVID-19 is a bad illness. 600,000 people have died. The vaccine could help them. We should give it a shot. Come on, we should just give it a shot. Well, that 600,000 died. I've already told you 85% of that was preventable with early treatment, which was actively suppressed and squashed.
The whole campaign against ivermectin hydroxychloroquine was a very deliberate attempt to suppress any alternative therapy, because emergency use authorization demands that there be no alternative. It doesn't work if you have something that costs pennies that might effectively be prophylactic against the disease, and both of those are. Both ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine have been used for decades. Ivermectin for 40 years, hydroxychloroquine for longer.
There has been some promise with hydroxychloroquine, this potential therapy for people who are infected with coronavirus.
No, the answer is no, and the evidence that you're talking about, John, is anecdotal evidence.
The clinical trials they had sponsored or were encouraging basically were doing very, very high doses, late stage disease, and then claiming it didn't work.
When hydroxychloroquine was shown to be the most popular drug used by physicians around the world for treating COVID, at that same time a study came out by a group called Surgisphere. This was a group of people that was sort of cobbled together. I think there were 4 people in the office only, and they came out with these huge studies, 2 of them, one that was published in The Lancet and one that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. They were both completely bogus studies. It was impossible for them to have collected the data in the period of time with only 4 people. Subsequently, both those studies were retracted by The Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine. Those medical journals are owned by the pharmaceutical companies. Even their editors have come out and said that they're essentially so controlled that they print what they're told to print. They wanted to roll out the vaccine when it came under this EUA. If they had something which was adequate or equally effective, then they wouldn't be able to do that, right? So they wouldn't be able to bring it under emergency coverage. And so they had to shoot down anything that was effective.
Our nation wasn't taken down by a virus, it was taken down by fear. If you have treatment, the fear goes away. They were cheap drugs, and now they've done everything they could to discourage you from using it. If you have a treatment for something, you don't need a vaccine program. And they don't want their $69 billion a year vaccine industry to go to zero. If this actually treats all sorts of viruses, you won't have to be taking vaccines.
What we found is ivermectin is unique in that it can be used through all phases of COVID. It can be used as preventive, it can be used in the early stages, it can be used in early hospitalization, and it can be used in the ICU. And in all phases of COVID, it's been shown to be effective. Tess Lawrie is really the expert on ivermectin. She looked at all the studies that were out there and found that ivermectin could prevent death by about 80%. And you think about how many people died from COVID because of neglect and improper treatment.
The ivermectin is actually the key to unlocking all the secrets of this pandemic. You know, it turns out hydroxychloroquine was squashed as well, and they're really good at reducing transmission, ivermectin especially, so it works for prevention as well as treatment.
She teamed up with Andrew Hill, in an attempt to get someone who was very much associated with the WHO, who people would listen to. And he was right on board. He was very enthusiastic. In fact, later he came out to say that if his brother was in the ICU, he'd want ivermectin given to him as treatment. And he came out with a study which the body of the study showed that ivermectin was very effective. We didn't need anything further. But in the conclusion and in the abstract, he not just wavered, but essentially he drove a nail into the coffin of ivermectin.
I'm in a very sensitive position here. What I'm trying to do...
People are in sensitive positions. They're in hospital and ICUs dying and they need this medicine. This medicine prevents deaths by 80%. So 80% of those people who are dying today don't need to die because there's ivermectin.
There are a lot of different opinions about this. As I said, some people...
We're looking at the data. It doesn't matter what other people say. It's absolutely crystal clear. We can save lives today if we can get the government to buy ivermectin. Whose conclusions are those on the review that you've done?
I don't really want to get into... I mean,
I think it needs to be clear. Who are these other voices that are in your paper that are not acknowledged? Does Unitate have a say? Do they influence what you write?
Unitate has a say in the conclusions of the paper, yeah. There is a whole group of people who think that ivermectin is complete rubbish.
I'm not talking about them. I'm not talking about them. I'm saying we know the evidence. How many people die today?
Oh, sure. I mean, 15,000 people a day.
You've shot us all in the foot. Everybody trying to do something good. You have actually completely destroyed it.
Okay. Well, that's where I guess we'll have to agree to differ.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how you sleep at night, honestly.
Okay. All right.
And then when you follow the money, you see that the university he was working for got a huge grant. I believe it was from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation just prior to that. So how many people died because one person got bought out?
Okay, so trial that the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which is the institute I direct, sponsored, called the Adaptive Covirus Disease Treatment Trial, or ACCT-1, was started in February 21st of this year, and it was a randomized placebo-controlled trial comparing the Gilead drug remdesivir with a placebo. The data shows that remdesivir has a clear-cut, significant positive effect in diminishing the time to recovery. It was 11 days compared to 15 days. Looking forward, this is very optimistic.
The company's stock just continues to rise thanks to Anthony Fauci touting this as the best COVID cure available, while discrediting hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. The problem was remdesivir is highly toxic, while hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin are actually safe and effective.
All it had shown was it reduced the hospital stay by 4 days. It did not improve hospitalization, death, or, severity of disease, or anything like that. I think it was about $3,000 a treatment in the United States.
Remdesivir did not have the clinical efficacy that the others did. It's a problem drug, not only because it was very inconsistent in how it worked, but also because of the side effects. And the side effects could include liver toxicity, they can include autoimmunity, and a whole range of things. With ivermectin, I think it's off patent. It basically wasn't going to make anybody any money. And the same for hydroxychloroquine. Again, hydroxychloroquine has been, an open source kind of drug for 70 years. Whereas remdesivir belonged to Gilead, and they were going to promote it heavily.
We have seen this from Anthony Fauci before in regards to the AIDS crisis, where he pushed a highly toxic AZT, which killed many but meant big money for big pharma. Again, ignoring inexpensive repurposed drugs and off-patent solutions.
I was using our protocol to treat critically ill patients in the ICU with a whole host of repurposed drugs. This is a memo sent to the entire healthcare system, but they targeted me personally. And what did this memo say? These medications will not be verified or dispensed for the prevention or treatment of COVID. I had 7 COVID patients, including a 31-year-old woman. I was not allowed to treat these people. I had to stand by idly. I had to stand by idly watching these people die.
She concealed the magnitude of it very, very well. Yeah, she was deflated and she was defeated, but anyone would expect that if you've had your more than 10-year career sort of ripped right out from underneath you. If you were bullied and harassed out of your job because of her medical decisions. Something that was none of these people's business, that they had no right to ask her whether she was vaccinated or not. They had no right to treat her in the way that they did. And inevitably they put her off on unpaid leave at the end of November. And on December 11th, she took her own life. That's the reality I woke up to on December 11th, was no longer having my wife in this world. We just had never made it through. We never made it to the other side of that. When they told me that she was gone, I just screamed no. I screamed no. I probably sat there screaming no for until I was hoarse in the throat, and I just lost my mind. I can't even explain it. Nothing prepared me from coming across my wife and finding her dead. That's probably my greatest regret, is that I didn't see it clearly, that she was concealed it well enough, or whatever the case, that I just didn't see it coming. I didn't understand. If her story and the loss of her could touch other people in such a way to create the change, I know that's what she would want to be part of. The world would be a far better place with her in it. And it's up to me to sort of find something of myself that honors her and that would live up to the contributions I believe that she would have made.